Imagine yourself in London in 1837. The country is in a time of insecurity and uncertainty, with the shadows of the French Revolution still hanging over Europe and the Industrial Revolution bringing rapid and profound changes. The United Kingdom, powerful and prosperous, is also marked by internal conflicts, with heated debates over political reform and a growing working class demanding more rights. And it is in this turbulent scenario that a young woman of just 18 years of age prepares to assume the throne of the greatest imperial power of the time. The young woman who would take the reins of the United Kingdom at a time of instability was none other than Victoria, daughter of the Duke of Kent, a branch of the British royal family. She was not the most obvious heir, nor was she the oldest, nor the most famous. But in 1837, with the death of King William IV, Victoria found herself faced with the responsibility of governing a vast empire and a people who were still struggling to find their balance between tradition and change. You may be wondering, how could such an inexperienced young woman take charge in such turbulent times? Well, the truth is that, until then, she had not been prepared to be queen. In fact, she never imagined that she would be crowned, as until that moment, her uncles and other relatives were in the line of succession. But the unexpected death of William IV made her the youngest monarch in British history. She ascended the throne at the age of 18, at a time of political instability, when the United Kingdom was at a crossroads. The system of government was still traditional, with monarchs wielding great power, but there was growing pressure for reform. The working class was rising up, demands for civil rights were on the rise, and British society was undergoing a transformation due to the Industrial Revolution, with new factories, technologies, and a rising middle class. Queen Victoria then found herself at the center of it all, with the responsibility of navigating political and social challenges, while also maintaining the unity of the empire and the monarchy. Now, you may be wondering, how did this young woman manage to deal with all these pressures and doubts about her reign? The answer, as we will see, is that Victoria stood out not only as a monarch, but as a symbol of change and modernization, a figure who brought stability to the United Kingdom, but also dealt with personal and political challenges that could have destroyed an empire if they were not faced with courage and cunning. After ascending to the throne in 1837, the young Queen Victoria, now in her early years of rule, found herself immersed in a world of political pressures and personal challenges. She was a monarch in a time of great change, with the United Kingdom facing the Industrial Revolution and intense social issues. But beyond the political and social tensions, there was also a very personal dilemma that she needed to resolve: her future in love and the monarchy. In 1840, at the age of 21, Victoria made a decisive and defining choice for her personal life and for the destiny of the United Kingdom. She married Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, a German prince with whom she had a relationship that at first glance might seem more political than romantic. But contrary to what many thought, Victoria and Albert formed a highly successful partnership, both emotionally and politically. Victoria's marriage to Albert was in many ways a strategic alliance. Albert was intelligent, disciplined, and highly skilled, and his education and vision were exactly what Victoria needed to help her govern in a more efficient and modern manner. Britain was at the time on the brink of profound transformation, and having a consort with a mind for reform and progress was essential to the stability of Victoria's reign. Despite their differences in background and culture, the chemistry between Victoria and Albert was undeniable. They shared a deep dedication to the public cause, with Albert often assisting Victoria in government decisions, from the administration of the empire to the organization of events and educational reforms. He was a strong advocate of scientific and technological innovation, and his vision influenced many of the reforms that occurred in the monarchy during the Victorian reign. However, the marriage was not only political and strategic, it was also based on genuine love. Victoria and Albert were deeply in love with each other. Victoria, a young woman who had assumed the throne alone, found in Albert not only a husband but a true partner. They communicated frequently in passionate letters, and even under the pressure of governing, they found a way to be close companions and mutual advisors. Albert complimented Victoria not only as a monarch, but also as a person. However, Victoria and Albert's marriage was not just a love story, it was also a transformation for the British monarchy. Albert, with his progressive views and interest in social reform, helped transform the way royalty was viewed. Together, they modernized the monarchy, making it more accessible to the people and more engaged in social welfare issues, such as public education and the abolition of poor factory working conditions. Victoria, in turn, felt deeply safe and supported by Albert, and over the years he became her closest advisor. She consulted him on everything from foreign policy to personal problems. This partnership was vital to the strengthening of the monarchy, and Albert became a central figure in the development of the British Empire during the Victorian era. The marriage between Queen Victoria and Prince Albert not only shaped Britain, but also had a lasting impact on the whole of Europe. Their lineage spread across the continent, with their children marrying into the royal houses of several European nations, creating a web of dynastic alliances that spanned generations. What seemed like a union of love and strategy within the British borders soon developed into a web of power relations that would unite several European monarchies under the common bond of Victoria, the grandmother of Europe. Victoria and Albert had 9 children, and many of these children married into other royal houses, consolidating the power of the Victorian dynasty throughout the continent. The union between the couple, in addition to being based on love, had a strong diplomatic component, and their alliances with the royal houses of Europe formed what was called the Royal Family of Europe. For example, Princess Victoria, the eldest daughter of Victoria and Albert, married Frederick of Prussia, becoming Queen Consort of Prussia and mother of the future German Emperor, William II. This marriage not only connected the United Kingdom to Prussia, but also placed Victoria's children in a position of great influence in Central Europe. Another example is the marriage of Princess Alice to the Duke of Hesse, which made her Grand Duchess of Hesse and helped create a strong connection with the Russian imperial family, later affected by the Russian Revolution and the fall of the monarchy. However, the most famous of the alliances was the marriage of Princess Beatrice, Victoria's youngest daughter, to Prince Henry of Battenberg, which also helped to cement Britain's position amid the political turmoil in Europe. These alliances were not limited to the marriages of Victoria's children. Her grandchildren also spread throughout Europe, creating a network of family relationships that crossed borders. Among them were the kings of Norway, Denmark, Sweden, and Russia, all with direct ties to the British royal house. However, while these family alliances seemed to solidify Victoria and Albert's influence in European politics, they also placed the Victorian monarchy in a delicate and complex position. The fact that many of the dynastic heirs were related by marriage to different nations meant that later, during the World Wars, the European monarchies found themselves ambiguously intertwined. Several members of the British royal family, including King George V himself, were cousins of Tsar Nicholas II of Russia and Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, which created a series of complex dilemmas during the period of increasing tension in Europe. This web of dynastic alliances that Victoria and Albert helped to create had paradoxically both positive and negative effects on the political stability of Europe. While on the one hand they consolidated a network of interconnected royal powers, on the other they made the royal houses extremely vulnerable to power struggles that would eventually culminate in the great wars of the 20th century. The name of Victoria, the grandmother of Europe, would remain immortalized in the dynastic connections of her generations. Each marriage and each child helped to perpetuate the power of the Victorian dynasty, even if, paradoxically, the legacy of family peace would turn into a complex web of alliances that would face their own crises in the years to come. Queen Victoria's reign was marked by great victories and the expansion of the British Empire. It was not an easy journey for the monarch. As we have seen, she began her journey to the throne at a young age, with an immense responsibility on her shoulders. But as time went on, she would face political pressures, personal challenges, and a growing demand for social and political change that would threaten the balance of power. One of the greatest personal challenges Victoria faced was undoubtedly the death of her beloved husband, Prince Albert, in 1861. The devastating loss of her husband and best friend left Victoria deeply scarred, and for many years she entered a period of severe mourning. During this time, the Queen withdrew from public life, no longer attending important events, and began to govern in a more secluded and reserved manner. Her withdrawal from the political stage raised concerns about her ability to govern effectively. Albert had been a close advisor and partner to Victoria, helping to modernize the monarchy and make strategic decisions for the empire. When he died, Victoria was left disoriented and alone, struggling with her personal grief while trying to maintain the stability of the empire. Her absence from the political scene during her mourning led many to question whether she could have remained an effective leader without Albert's support. In addition to mourning, Victoria also faced domestic political challenges. The United Kingdom was in a time of great change, and there was growing pressure for political and social reform. The Industrial Revolution had transformed the economy and the living conditions of the population, and many rebelled against social inequality and factory working conditions. Labor reforms, such as shorter working hours and better living conditions for the working class, were being discussed, and Victoria, with her conservative views, had to balance the needs of the monarchy with the demands of the people. Victoria also faced political difficulties with her prime ministers, Benjamin Disraeli and William Gladstone, who, although they were allies on many issues, had opposing political views. Disraeli, who favored imperialism and the modernization of the monarchy, had a close relationship with Victoria, who admired his policies. Gladstone, with his more liberal ideas, was viewed with skepticism by the Queen, who often disagreed with his proposed political reforms. These conflicts between politicians made the British political environment even more challenging for a queen who was at times torn between loyalty to her royal family and what was best for the empire and the country. Victoria's monarchy also faced challenges in terms of the modernization of royalty. British society was changing rapidly, and many believed that the monarchy needed to adapt to these times of increasing democracy and social change. The role of royalty, which had previously been primarily ceremonial and divine, was being challenged as popular sovereignty and the parliamentary system grew stronger. As the most powerful queen of the time, Victoria had to strike a balance between maintaining monarchical authority and accepting the diminishing political power of the royal family, especially with the growing power of democratic parliaments and the civil rights movement. However, despite these tensions, Victoria has always shown herself to be resilient. Political pressure and personal challenges have not caused her to crumble. Over time, she has managed to regain her strength and public image, resuming a leadership position that has maintained her as a symbol of stability and unity for the nation. Her relationship with the royal family, especially with her children and grandchildren, has been crucial to this recovery, as she knew that the future of the monarchy depended on the ability to modernize family relations and strengthen the bond between the royal houses. Victoria's reign was a true testament to resilience and adaptation in times of crisis, and she managed to transform her personal and political challenges into a strength for the monarchy, shaping the image of Queen Victoria as the leader who faced all difficulties with courage and political wisdom. When Queen Victoria came to the throne, Britain was in a period of great change and development, but it was during her reign that the country established itself as a major global power, paving the way for what became known as the Victorian Age. During the 19th century, the British Empire expanded at an impressive rate, while British society underwent profound transformations. The Industrial Revolution was well underway before Victoria came to the throne, but it was under her leadership that the United Kingdom became a centre of technological and economic innovation. Industry, fueled by the invention of steam engines, railways and communications technologies, such as the telegraph, led Britain to become the workshop of the world, a global financial and commercial centre. Imperial expansionism was also a defining feature of the Victorian era. The British Empire expanded further, incorporating territories on every continent from Africa to Asia, creating a global network of trade and colonization. Victoria was proclaimed Empress of India in 1876, a title that reflected the enormous extent of her influence. She was not only a queen, but also the symbolic leader of an empire that controlled more than a quarter of the world's population. The Victorian era, however, was not just about imperial and economic growth. It was also a period of profound social and cultural change. At home, the British lived by strict norms of morality and behaviour. Victorian society was characterized by a rigid public morality that influenced everything from family life to laws and public policies. There was a strong focus on morality, family values, and social responsibilities. The children of the monarchy, who were largely raised with a strict education, also became symbols of these norms of behavior. On the other hand, the social system itself was undergoing transformation. The working class began to organize itself, with the first signs of labor movements and struggles for civil rights. The Industrial Revolution brought with it difficult living conditions for many workers, but it also created a new middle class that eventually began to demand better living and working conditions. This middle class, which expanded considerably during Victoria's reign, was a reflection of social changes and economic progress, and with it came the rise of cities. Public education and social reforms also gained momentum during this period. Victoria, with the help of advisors such as Prince Albert, was an advocate for many of these reforms. She closely followed the implementation of laws that improved working conditions and supported educational initiatives that helped to increase literacy and provide access to education for all social classes. Furthermore, British culture flourished during the Victorian period. Literature became a powerful medium for social and political expression, with greats such as Charles Dickens, Thomas Hardy, and George Eliot creating works that addressed social issues, inequality, and societal change. Art and architecture also reflected the desire to immortalize the power and grandeur of the empire, with monuments and majestic buildings being constructed across Britain. But the height of the Victorian era also brought some contradictions to the surface. As the empire expanded, abuses of power and inequalities in the colonies began to be questioned more and more. The treatment of colonial populations and the exploitation of natural resources in the colonies provoked criticism at home and abroad, creating a moral dilemma that would continue to haunt Britain into the 20th century. Queen Victoria's life was never the same after the death of her beloved husband, Prince Albert, in 1861. Although he had been not only her lifelong companion, but also her political and emotional advisor, the loss of Albert deeply devastated the Queen. Her grief was so deep and prolonged that for many years she withdrew almost entirely from public life. Prince Albert had been not only a loving husband, but also an extremely influential advisor to Victoria. He was the one who helped modernize the British monarchy, supporting social and educational reforms and helping to transform the image of royalty from a distant and isolated institution to one closer to the people. Together, Victoria and Albert formed a powerful partnership, but with his death, Victoria was left deeply disoriented and lonely. In the year following her death, Victoria withdrew from many of her royal duties. She began to avoid public engagements and secluded herself in her palaces, most notably Osborne House on the Isle of Wight, where she remained for much of her years of mourning. Victoria's public mourning was immense. She used her mourning to withdraw from many of the duties that her office required, which caused concern among her ministers and politicians. Many feared that the monarchy would lose its authority without an active queen, especially at a time of rapid change in the empire. The loss of Albert had a profound effect on Victoria's government. During this period, the Queen had become increasingly trusting of her ministers, especially her Prime Minister, Lord Palmerston. However, her political relationship with him had also deteriorated, as while Palmerston wanted a more assertive Britain in international affairs, Victoria had become more reserved and reticent. This caused a rift between the government and the Queen, as her absence from politics was creating tensions within the government. Yet Victoria's grief also brought out another side of her strength of character. Although she withdrew from the public eye, she did not give up her role as mother of the nation. Her popularity as monarch did not wane, and over time she gradually began to resume her duties. However, the following years would be marked by her emotional isolation from political life. For many, the fact that the Queen remained steadfast in her duties, even in her grief, made her a symbol of perseverance. However, the shadow of her grief was something that lingered for many years, affecting her decisions and her vision for the role of the monarchy in the future. This long period of mourning also had a lasting effect on her personal life and the way she was perceived by the public. The Queen became an even more revered, but also somewhat distant figure, with many British people seeing her as a woman deeply marked by grief, but who at the same time represented the stability that the country needed. She was called the Mother of the Nation, but also the Widow of the Nation, a metaphor that captured both her dignity and her personal grief. However, over time, Victoria found her feet again. She continued to rule for over 30 years after Albert's death, going through a long period of adjustment and learning to adapt to the new demands of the empire and society, while preserving the memory of her beloved husband. After years of intense mourning over the death of Prince Albert, Queen Victoria needed to find a way to overcome her personal grief and regain control of her kingdom. The British Empire was undergoing a transformation, and with it came new social, political, and economic challenges that required strong leadership. It would not be easy for the Queen, who had withdrawn from public life for so long, to restore the prestige of the monarchy, but that is exactly what she did, strategically and courageously. During the years of his retirement, British society was undergoing rapid change. The Industrial Revolution had transformed the economy, leading to major changes in the cities and in the living conditions of the working classes. New demands for rights and labor reforms were on the rise, and pressure for social equality was growing. At the same time, the empire was expanding into new territories, and Britain's greatness on the world stage had to be maintained. Over time, Victoria began to emerge from her mourning and resume her place as the leader of the empire, but she was no longer simply ruling as a traditional monarch. She adapted to social change and became a figure who symbolized the country's perseverance and stability. Her role as Mother of the Nation gained even more strength, and she became a symbol of continuity in an era marked by rapid change. The great transformation of her leadership began with a change in the way she viewed the monarchy. Although she was very traditionalist, Victoria realized the need to modernize the image of the crown and adapt it to the new realities of the country. She embraced the innovations of the industrial age, such as photography, which allowed the monarchy to connect more closely with the people. Photographs of Victoria and her royal family became an essential tool in humanizing the royal family and allowing citizens to see the monarch in a more accessible way, breaking the distant and incomprehensible image of royalty. Also actively involved in political affairs and social reform, she worked closely with ministers such as Benjamin Disraeli and William Gladstone, although her relationship with them was often marked by conflicts of opinion. Disraeli, for example, who favored imperialism and a more modern monarchy, held views that contrasted with those of the more liberal Gladstone. These political conflicts were a reflection of a Britain that was rapidly modernizing but still resisted many of the liberal reforms. Victoria had to balance the needs of the empire with internal pressures. She was not just a ceremonial figure, but a monarch who also dealt with pressing issues such as electoral reform, railway expansion, and labor reforms that ensured better conditions for factory workers. Although she was a more conservative monarch, she did not hesitate to support social reforms when they would benefit the country and the empire, especially if they reflected traditional values of justice and the well-being of the people. But Victoria's recovery from the reign of King Victoria was not just political. She also had to deal with the expanding empire, which began to face new international tensions, especially regarding the administration of the colonies and imperial competition with other European powers. British industry needed to continue to prosper, while foreign policy required Britain to maintain its status as a great global power. The reconstruction of her image as a monarch was also reflected in a closer relationship with her children and grandchildren. Victoria used the royal dynasty as a way to strengthen ties with other European powers, ensuring strategic marriages with royal houses from different countries, something that became known as the grandmother of Europe. As the 19th century drew to a close and the 20th century began, the United Kingdom faced a new set of challenges that threatened the stability of the empire, the monarchy, and the country's political structures. The reign of Queen Victoria, which had begun with such promise and stability, now found itself facing a rapidly changing world. Tensions within the United Kingdom and the growing imperialism of other global powers challenged Britain's leadership position on the world stage. Internally, the country was undergoing significant social change. Labour movements were becoming more organised and demanding better rights for the working class. The emergence of movements such as suffragism, which sought the right to vote for women, posed a major challenge to the Victorian social order, which was based on traditional values and a rigid social structure. Britain was no longer a monolithic society dominated by the upper classes, and pressure for democratic reform was mounting. The British imperial system, although still powerful, was beginning to feel the effects of global modernization. Other powers, such as Germany, France, and the United States, were becoming increasingly influential on the world stage, which meant that Britain could no longer act alone or as the sole global superpower. Imperial rivalry began to intensify, especially in Africa and the Middle East, with disputes over colonies and spheres of influence. At a critical juncture, World War I became an imminent reality. Although Victoria had died in 1901 and her son Edward VII had succeeded to the throne, the legacy of the Victorian age was still alive in the political decisions that marked the empire's off-season. Edward VII and his successors would have to navigate these tensions, many of which were exacerbated by rising nationalism in Europe and conflicts of imperial interest. Furthermore, the desire for modernization and greater political freedom in the United Kingdom led to major internal reforms. The system of government was adapting to be more democratic. The Suffrage Act of 1867 had already extended the right to vote to middle-class men, and the women's rights movement was gaining momentum, with emerging female figures such as Emmeline Pankhurst, who campaigned for women's suffrage. This was a radical change for a society that until then had deeply valued its conservative social and political norms. The end of the Victorian monarchy and the accession of Edward VII in 1901 marked the transition to a new world, in which the monarchy began to lose direct political power and become a more symbolic and ceremonial institution. Victoria had been a queen strongly associated with absolute power and empire, but with her death, the United Kingdom was forced to adapt to a new reality, in which democracy and the civil rights movement were becoming increasingly central to British politics. Although the Victorian monarchy was still seen as a pillar of stability, the world was becoming more modern and more democratic, which resulted in a decrease in royal power and the need to modernize institutions to align with new social demands. The transition to the 20th century brought new challenges, and the British royal family would have to navigate a period of great change, including the First World War, the fall of empires, and the emergence of a new world order. When Edward VII ascended the throne in 1901, following the death of his mother, Queen Victoria, he found himself in a Britain in the midst of a transformation. The Victorian legacy of traditionalism and imperialism had given way to a new era, full of challenges and uncertainties for both Britain and the British monarchy. As the new king, Edward VII had to adapt to this changing world, where social and political pressures were growing and the British Empire was beginning to lose its former luster. Edward VII, known as the Peaceful King, was not as involved in domestic politics as his mother Victoria, but his pragmatic and diplomatic approach had a significant impact on a monarchy that needed to modernize itself to remain relevant. Unlike his mother, who had ruled with great personal authority, Edward VII was more focused on diplomatic relations and building international alliances, especially in Europe. One of the major transformations during Edward VII's reign was his attempt to reshape the image of the monarchy. The Victorian era, which had been marked by rigid morality and conservative values, gave way to a more relaxed and modern era known as the Edwardian era. During his reign, British high society adopted a more elegant and cosmopolitan lifestyle, with lavish parties, sophisticated fashions, and a greater openness to international culture. Edward VII, often seen as a cosmopolitan monarch, cultivated an image of elegance and charm that captivated European elites, strengthening ties with other royal houses on the continent. However, this new modernity also brought challenges for the monarchy. The United Kingdom was experiencing increasing pressure for political and social reform. The working class was gaining a voice, and the fight for women's rights was becoming a mass movement. Edward VII, although largely reserved regarding domestic political issues, had to navigate demands for greater democracy and social justice. While the monarchy remained a symbol of stability, parliamentary reforms and struggles for a more egalitarian society posed challenges to the image of royalty. Externally, Britain was beginning to face increasing imperial competition. Germany, under Kaiser Wilhelm II, was becoming an imperialist and militaristic power, and the British Empire, which had expanded considerably under Victoria, was now facing increasing competition from other European powers. Although Edward VII had shown himself adept at strengthening British diplomacy, the imperial race and increasing international rivalries would eventually lead to the outbreak of World War I shortly after his death. Edward VII's reign was also marked by social and cultural transformation. The suffrage movement, which sought to secure the right to vote for women, grew considerably during his era. The Industrial Revolution had brought immense change, and new social movements were challenging the established order. The working class began to organize into stronger trade unions, and labor reforms, such as the Factories Act and improvements in working conditions, were implemented to respond to new social needs. However, although Edward VII was an internationally admired king, he was unable to prevent growing pressure for democratic change within Britain. Although the monarchy was still a central figure of stability, the United Kingdom was preparing for a future in which the power of the crown would be increasingly ceremonial, with parliament and democracy playing a greater role. When World War I broke out in 1914, the British Empire, which had been a global superpower during the reign of Queen Victoria and Edward VII, faced challenges that even the monarchy could not foresee. The world was changing rapidly, and the war would not only affect society, but would also transform the British monarchy forever. The British royal family, which had been a figure of great stability and prestige, had to deal with the impact of the war, both internally and in relation to its global standing. The First World War was a moment of rupture for the European monarchies. While the Romanov dynasty in Russia was overthrown and the Austro-Hungarian monarchy was also abolished, the British monarchy had to adapt to a new world in which the empire no longer dominated as before, and imperialist powers began to give way to new democratic powers. King George V, son of Edward VII and grandson of Victoria, was on the throne during the First World War. Although he was a devoted and beloved monarch, the Great War brought enormous challenges to him and his family. The United Kingdom was devastated by the war, with millions of British soldiers killed and wounded, and the civilian population also facing great hardships, such as food rationing and social unrest. George V and his family were directly affected by the war. The king himself had to adapt to the fact that in the context of the war, the monarchy could no longer be seen only as a symbol of greatness and imperial power, but also as part of the war effort. The monarch was an active supporter of the British troops and visited several military hospitals to raise the morale of wounded soldiers. He also encouraged charitable actions and support for the people, becoming a central figure in national solidarity. However, the war also brought to the fore a delicate issue: the identity of the British monarchy. During the war, anti-German movements arose in Britain, and the royal family, which was originally of German origin, faced criticism and even public hostility. The name House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, which had been the name of the royal family, was replaced by the name Windsor in 1917, in an effort to distance the monarchy from its Germanic heritage and identify with the British people. This act symbolized the need for modernization and adaptation of the royal family to a new social and political context. Domestically, the war also hastened the decline of the British Empire. The Great War was extremely costly, and after the war, Britain was left with massive debts and a society that was increasingly demanding change. The British Empire began to crumble, with several colonies gaining independence in the following decades, and the political power of the monarchy was increasingly limited, with parliament and representative government taking over. Despite this, the British royal family managed to maintain its popularity, mainly due to the exemplary behavior of George V during the war and the royal family's efforts to maintain national cohesion. But the impact of the First World War was not only a military or political transformation, it also shaped British society in a new context of equality and democracy, where absolute monarchies were losing ground to parliamentary governments and the voice of the people was becoming stronger. After the devastation of the First World War, the United Kingdom faced profound change. The British Empire, which had been the world's greatest imperial power, was in decline. Colonies began to gain independence, and Britain began to adapt to a new world in which democratic movements and internal pressures demanded significant changes in the power structure. And at the center of it all, the British royal family, under King George V, had to adjust its position and image to survive a new era of social and political transformation. George V's reign was a turning point for the British monarchy. During the war, he did his best to unite the nation, but after the war ended, the empire began to disintegrate. Colonies that had previously been under British rule began to seek independence, and this led to a growing sense of distrust of colonial powers, including Britain. In 1919, the Treaty of Versailles and the post-war changes radically shifted the global balance of power, with defeated nations, such as Germany, being punished and victorious powers adjusting their interests. What had begun as an empire that dominated much of the world had become a diminished imperial power, and this had a direct effect on the British royal family. In an attempt to maintain the unity of the United Kingdom and adapt the monarchy to the new reality, King George V introduced a number of significant changes. The most visible of these was the change in the name of the royal family, which had become a problem during the war due to the dynasty's Germanic origins. To remove any association with Germany, the royal family adopted the name House of Windsor in 1917, a strategic change intended to reaffirm its connection to Great Britain and the British people. This change also reflected a desire to modernize the image of the royal family and distance the monarchy from old feudal practices. Another major challenge was the growing power of parliamentary democracy. During the 19th century, constitutional monarchy had already diminished the direct political power of monarchs, and now, with the end of the war and the emergence of new social and labor movements, the role of the royal family became mainly ceremonial. The Russian Revolution of 1917, the fall of other European monarchies, such as in Germany and Russia, also had a psychological impact on the British royal family. George V, although he continued to be seen as a figure of stability, had to deal with the new symbolic role of the monarchy in a post-imperial era. In the social sphere, Great Britain underwent profound transformations. The labor movement gained strength, with the formation of the Labour Party and the inclusion of more voices in elections. Universal suffrage was one of the greatest achievements of this era, When women finally won the right to vote in 1918, this meant that the monarchy faced not only political challenges, but also socio-cultural ones. New generations demanded greater political participation, and the monarchy would need to adapt to this growing democracy. However, even with all these changes, the royal family managed to remain relevant, mainly due to the diplomatic work of George V, who established a strong network of diplomatic alliances with other royal houses in Europe. He became a respected and trusted figure, albeit in a more limited role. His ability to connect with other monarchs and international leaders was crucial, as he ensured that the British monarchy did not lose its position in international relations, even with the imperial decline. The 1920s and 1930s brought enormous challenges to Britain, and the British royal family, which had been struggling with the effects of the First World War, now faced a new wave of economic and social hardship. The Great Depression, which affected the global economy, was a time of turmoil for the United Kingdom, and it also tested the role of the monarchy in a society increasingly focused on democracy and social issues. King George V, who had lived through the height of the empire and the fall of several European monarchies after the war, began to face a decline in the monarchy's popularity. His image, although still respected, no longer had the same unifying impact that it had had during the first 2 decades of the 20th century. The political and economic evolution of the United Kingdom meant that the monarchy had to adapt to a new reality where democracy and social reforms were on the rise. When George V died in 1936, his son Edward VIII succeeded to the throne. However, his short reign, marked by the famous abdication crisis, challenged the royal family in ways the monarchy had never experienced before. Edward VIII, who would become the abdicating king, made a controversial decision by abdicating the throne to marry Wallis Simpson, a divorcee, which was unacceptable to British society and the Anglican Church. The abdication crisis generated a wave of criticism of the monarchy, and many feared that the royal family was losing its relevance. This image crisis led to a temporary weakening of the British monarchy, and Edward VIII's brother George VI ascended the throne at a time of great uncertainty. George VI's reign, which began in a turbulent manner, was marked by a number of challenges, including the need to restore the image of the monarchy and unite the British people during the Second World War. But the British monarchy's adaptation to new social and economic realities did not end there. During the 1930s, the Great Depression and increasing taxation on the working class meant that the royal family needed to engage more directly with society. George VI, helped by his wife Queen Elizabeth, mother of the current Queen Elizabeth II, began to reshape the way the royal family communicated with the public, becoming more approachable and humane. They began to appear at charitable events, visit poverty-stricken areas, and get involved in community projects, creating a new image of the monarchy closer to the people. Furthermore, the Second World War brought another great challenge, but it was also an opportunity to restore confidence in the monarchy, especially after the bombing of London and the resilience shown by the royal family during the conflict. George VI and his wife Queen Elizabeth showed remarkable strength by remaining in London during the attacks, which made the royal family a symbol of resilience and unity for the British people. After the Second World War, the United Kingdom was profoundly changed, and the British royal family had to adapt to a changing world. The British Empire was in decline, and Britain now faced a new reality in which colonies began to seek independence, and decolonization was accelerating. For the British monarchy, this period represented a major shift in roles, with the empire losing its prestige and democracy gaining more power and influence. King George VI, who had restored the monarchy's image during the war, died in 1952, and his daughter Elizabeth II ascended the throne. She assumed the role of monarch at a difficult time when the United Kingdom was beginning to move away from its imperial era and redefine itself as a modern nation, focused more on European and international relations than on maintaining a global empire. For the royal family, this meant that, For the first time, the monarchy had to adapt to a world where imperial power was no longer central. One of the first issues Queen Elizabeth II faced was how to maintain the relevance of the monarchy in a society that was becoming increasingly democratic and focused on social welfare. The image of British royalty, which had been nurtured for generations as a symbol of power and stability, now needed to be reshaped to align with the democratic and modern values that were emerging in British society. Furthermore, decolonization began to accelerate after the war. The British Empire, which had dominated vast parts of the world, was disintegrating, and many countries began seeking independence. India became independent in 1947, followed by a number of other former colonies gaining sovereignty. The United Kingdom had to adapt its foreign policy to deal with a post-imperial world, and the royal family, led by Queen Elizabeth II, had to find a new way to represent the country on the global stage. The modernization of the monarchy also involved changes within the royal family itself. The Queen and her family began to interact more openly with the public, and international travel became a means of building new diplomatic alliances and strengthening Britain's image as a modern democratic nation. State visits and overseas travel helped to humanize the image of the royals, bringing them closer to the people and presenting a more approachable and internationally supportive image. One of the most significant changes was how the monarchy came to be viewed by the population. Previously, royal functions had been almost exclusively ceremonial and symbolic, but with the decline of imperial power and the rise of democracy, the role of the royal family was transformed into one of cultural and representative rather than executive power. This required the royal family to adapt to a new role in which its political importance was no longer the same, but its cultural and symbolic importance became even more evident. During the 1960s, social and cultural movements began to change the relationship between the monarchy and the British people, but Queen Elizabeth II and her family managed to maintain popular respect and loyalty even in times of great change. The royal family became a symbol of continuity and stability, especially at a time when the United Kingdom was moving away from its imperial grandeur. From the 1950s onwards, the British royal family began to insert itself more visibly into public life through the advancement of television. The first major change in the relationship between the royal family and the public came with the broadcast of the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II in 1953. Television became a powerful means of direct access to the public, allowing the British and the entire world to watch this historic event live. It was a way of humanizing the royal family, making them more accessible and allowing people to see the Queen in an intimate and meaningful moment. Before television, the British monarchy was seen as a distant institution, often associated with an image of traditional formal royalty. But with the rise of television, the monarchy had to adapt. The coronation of Elizabeth II was the first important step in this process. For the first monarch of the television era, it was a unique opportunity to present the monarchy in a more modern and intimate way. The image of the young, vibrant Queen generated enormous fascination, creating an emotional connection with the public that had never existed before. In the years that followed, the royal family continued to adapt to the new media era. Interviews and documentaries began to be produced to show the more personal side of the royal family. State visits and other important events were broadcast on television, and the Queen and her children began to be more closely watched and analyzed by the public. This led to a more intense and at the same time critical relationship, as the media began to demand that the royal family behave in a more appropriate manner in line with the expectations of modern society. In the 1980s and 1990s, the British royal family became widely discussed in the mass media, especially as personal matters began to be exposed. The marriage of Charles and Diana, followed by the couple's separation and divorce, was a major turning point. The increasingly prominent tabloid media examined the royal family's personal lives, casting them in a more critical light and making the royals a subject of constant speculation. This media exposure has created a paradox. as the monarchy has become more accessible and visible, it has also faced increasing pressure to maintain its impeccable image. Internal divisions within the royal family, such as the tumultuous marriage of Charles and Diana, have created a scenario of public drama. Yet even with these challenges, Queen Elizabeth II has maintained her position of stability and continuity. She has managed to use the media to her advantage, always remaining reserved and dignified in her statements, while allowing her children and other members of the royal family to make more public appearances. The real turning point in the monarchy's adaptation to modern media came with the rise of social media in the 2000s. The British royal family made its first forays into social media by creating official profiles on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, allowing them to connect directly with the public. This was a strategy of modernization and direct engagement, especially with younger generations who were beginning to turn away from traditional television. With the advent of social media, images of the royal family began to be shared in real time, allowing its members to interact directly with the public in a way never seen before. Prince William, Kate Middleton, and Prince Harry have become major media figures, not only because of their position within the royal family, but also because of their charitable activities and their presence on digital platforms. This has allowed the British monarchy to remain relevant to new generations, while still maintaining its traditional image of stability and tradition. The reign of Queen Elizabeth II, which began in 1952, has spanned several decades and profound changes in society. However, as the British monarchy enters the 21st century, the generational transition within the royal family has become a central theme for the institution's future. Elizabeth II's sons, most notably Charles, Prince of Wales, and now her grandsons, William and Harry, have begun to assume a more prominent role in public life and royal activities. Charles, the Queen's eldest son, has been heir to the throne for many years, but his accession to the throne has been marked by both expectations and criticism. For many years, Charles's figure was overshadowed by the larger-than-life personalities of his mother and his former wife, Princess Diana, which made him often seen as a controversial and complex figure by many Britons. However, over the years, Charles has dedicated himself to important issues such as sustainability, the environment, and social welfare, establishing a legacy that, although not always appreciated, is beginning to be more recognized, especially by younger generations. But the transition to the new generation has really been symbolized by Charles' children, Prince William and Princess Kate, and Prince Harry, who have become much more accessible and connected figures with the modern public. William and Kate have been seen as the new face of the monarchy, adopting a more modern lifestyle that is closer to ordinary citizens, but without losing the dignity and seriousness required of the position. They have been actively involved in social causes, such as mental health and poverty, and their positive image has been a key to revitalizing the royal family and attracting younger generations. William and Kate's wedding was widely broadcast and was a landmark in the history of the monarchy, with millions of people watching and celebrating its legacy of stability and continuity. Over the years, William, as Duke of Cambridge, has taken on an increasingly prominent role, and his relationship with Kate has been instrumental in making the monarchy more modern and accessible. They have also shown resilience, especially after the hardships they have faced in the media and the strains of being public figures. However, Prince Harry and his wife Meghan Markle have brought a new dynamic to the monarchy. By stepping back from royal duties and moving to the United States, they have sparked controversy and debate about the future of the royal family and the new social demands of the monarchy in the 21st century. The couple have been active in social causes, particularly related to mental health, social justice, and human rights, but their decision to step back from certain duties has brought to the fore the debate about the role of the modern monarchy and the autonomy of its members. Royalty in the 21st century has become much more than just a political or ceremonial institution. It has come to be seen as a symbol of adaptation to change. The generational transition has brought about a new approach to the role of the monarchy, where media presence, social engagement and modernization are necessary to maintain the public relevance of the royal family. The challenge now is to balance the traditions of the monarchy with the new expectations of a globalized and digitalized society, where transparency, humanization and social responsibility play a much more significant role. Yet despite all the changes, Queen Elizabeth II remains a symbol of continuity, even now that she is in her later years. Her ability to remain a figure of stability as her family adapts to changing society has been a key factor in ensuring that the British monarchy remains at the heart of the United Kingdom. The future of the monarchy, with Charles, William and other members of the royal family, will be shaped by how the royal family deals with new challenges, including the demand for greater transparency, accessibility and social relevance. Future generations will need to adapt to a world in which social expectations for the British royal family will be much more demanding, but also, in some ways, much more connected to the people. Thank you for following our journey through the history of the British monarchy and the royal family. As the monarchy continues to evolve, it will face new challenges in a more democratic, globalized and connected world, but the spirit of continuity and stability of the British royal family will surely continue to be a strong symbol for the British people and the world. Comment, like and subscribe to the channel for more exciting stories.